What's up everybody, I'm HoopsandHipHop. So if you've been a fan of the channel for very long, you probably know that I love to go over Pokemon theories. In fact, our very last video that we did prior to this one was about just that. In recent months, I have been going over what I believe are the best theories from every generation of Pokemon, and in today's video we're going to be doing something similar, albeit kind of different at the same time. Just the same way in those videos that I looked at 5 amazing theories from every generation, we're going to be looking at another set of 5 amazing Pokemon theories, but this time relating to a specific Pokemon type, and that type would be the Fairy type. The Fairy type is obviously interesting because not only is it the newest Pokemon type currently, but it also does just have its own sense of uniqueness and wonder to it in general that makes it a really attractive type both for battle and for Pokemon research, including theories. So today I have gathered together 5 amazing Pokemon theories that revolve in and around the Fairy type. I think this is going to be a great way to show off some great Pokemon theories while at the same time showing just how cool the Fairy type is, and if you guys like this video and if it does well enough, we might just do this for the other types as well. Also, if there is a specific author to any one of these theories, they will be credited with a link in the description, so be sure to check that out if you're interested. And with all that being said, let's go ahead and get into the theories. Okay, so this first one actually has to do with a Fairy type expert rather than a Pokemon, and that would be none other than Mina, but it doesn't only have to do with Mina, it also has to do with another trainer from Pokemon Sun and Moon, Ilmia. The theory here is that Mina and Ilima's type specialties of Fairy and Normal respectively were actually switched for the final version of the game, and it was actually Ilima who was originally meant to be the Fairy type specialist. This actually makes a lot of sense on both sides, and if we look at Ilima to start with, not only does he have pink hair, which admittedly is a bit of a weak reason, but it still kind of does go in favor of the Fairy type, but he also has those trademark glittering Fairy type eyes, if you will, that we've also seen a couple other Fairy type specialists have, including the Fairy Tail Girl trainer class and Valerie, the Fairy type gym leader of Laverre City. On the flip side though, if we take a look at Mina, she is dressed in essentially what is white and gray clothing, which are basically the 2 most plain colors that you could ask for, which definitely would fit with the normal type. But it gets even more convincing when you consider her role as a painter, and it just so happens that we have a painter Pokemon in Smeargle who also just so happens to be a normal type. Oh, and by the way, it's also a Pokemon that Ilima, the other character in question here, uses on his team. And finally, going back to Ilima one more time, he is known to have actually gone to Kalos in the past in order to study abroad, and as we all know, Kalos is the home to the Fairy type since that's where it was introduced, so it makes all of the sense in the world that he would kind of bring that type back with him and be the Fairy type specialist during the events of Sun and Moon. Overall, I think this theory makes a ton of sense and makes these 2 characters just that much more interesting. Next up, we are actually going to go to the Kalos region and go to the epicenter of the Fairy type in that region, Laverre City. Now, this theory actually comes from a fellow PokeTuber by the name of Exelian. Once again, you can check it out with the link in the description if you'd like to see his video on the theory, but essentially this theory states that the Fairy type actually did quite literally originate from Laverre City. If you have ever played Pokemon X and Y, you would probably know that Laverre City is not only the home to the Fairy type gym, but it's also just a very magical city in general. It definitely has a fairy tale flavor to it that's unlike anything else you would find in the Kalos region. And one of the most significant things in the city is of course the gym, and out of the gym rises a giant tree, and on that tree is actually a giant clock, and if you look at this clock closely enough, you'll actually notice that it has 13 hours on it instead of the standard 12. This might seem like a developer mistake if you're not in the know, but the 13th hour on this clock is actually very much on purpose. According to Exelian's theory, the 13th hour is something that is actually present in many different forms of folklore, and what it is essentially is another hour's worth of time, therefore a 13th hour, that some people can experience in the middle of our standard 12-hour time system. And during this hour, our world can actually kind of cross over over with that of other worlds, including the world of fairy tale-like creatures. So because of the fact that this city seems to run on the 13-hour time clock, and because of the fact that this city just has such an aura of fairy magic to it, Exelion states in his theory that he believes that Laver City could actually be the point in which our world crosses over with the fairy world, and that's where fairy-type Pokemon eventually came from, crossing over from their world into our world as a result of that mythical 13th hour. Next up though, we are going to look at what is probably the most iconic and well-known theory that relates to anything that is fairy type in nature, and that would be the classic Clefable Gengar theory. I'm sure many, if not all of you, have heard this theory before, but because it is so iconic and relates to the fairy type, we are going to recap it here with one other detail I want to add to it that makes it that much more convincing. Essentially, the theory states that Gengar, the Generation 1 Ghost-type Pokemon, is actually the shadow of Clefable, another Generation 1 Pokemon who is now, as of Generation 6, Fairy-type. Evidence in favor of this includes the fact that Clefable and Gengar are almost identical in terms of size and body shape, and on top of that, Gengar, not only being a ghost-type Pokemon, is also known as the Shadow Pokemon, making it the perfect candidate to actually be the shadow of another Pokemon. Gengar also just very much looks like an anti-Clefable, if you will, where not only does it have a very similar body style to Clefable, but where Clefable has its trademark wings or very soft and friendly looking hair tuft on the top of its head, Gengar has sinister looking spikes, so it very much does look like Gengar could be a dark shadow version of Clefable. Another very convincing piece of evidence in favor of this prior to Generation 6 was the fact that Clefable was normal type and Gengar was ghost type, meaning these two were immune to each other, much like you would be with your shadow, since your shadow can't technically hit you and you can't hit your shadow. However, this has changed since Generation 6, since Clefable is now Fairy type and therefore can hit Gengar, and Gengar can hit it back. However, I don't think that piece of evidence is completely gone forever, because it's actually replaced with something that is just as convincing. And that is the fact that Gengar is also Poison type, one of the 2 types out of the 17 others that are available that are actually strong against Fairy type, and I think this makes a big deal for the theory. While it does make sense that its pre-evolution Ghastly is a ghost type because it's a gas-based ghost Pokemon, it did always kind of seem odd that the only ghost family in all of Kanto weren't even pure ghost type and had that poison type attached to them. And with Clefable, its supposed counterpart, now being Fairy type, it just makes the poison type for Gengar fit so much more perfectly and makes so much more sense because once again, it's kind of like the antithesis to Clefable's new Fairy typing. And with these 2 Pokemon able to keep such a strong bond with one another, even with something as big as a type change for Clefable occurring in Generation 6, I think that speaks to how legitimate this theory truly is, because it still holds up even with the new canon information that we have for these Pokemon that was changed as of Generation 6. Our next theory on the list actually has to do with a pair of Fairy-type Pokemon, and that would be none other than Carbink and Diancie. Now, Carbink and Diancie are very, very closely related, with the Pokédex entry for Diancie even going so far as to say that it is actually a mutated version of Carbink. Now, there has been speculation going around pretty much since X and Y's release that Carbink was originally going to be a pre-evolution for Diancie before Diancie was made into a mythical, and while I very much believe that is the case and think it's very likely, there really isn't any evidence at this point in time that can legitimately suggest that. However, one theory between these 2 Pokemon that we can legitimately discuss is the fact that Diancie mutated into Carbink as a result of the Ultimate Weapon. The Ultimate Weapon is a very, very important part of X and Y's story, and if you delve into the lore of the Ultimate Weapon itself, you'll find out that it is actually the reason why Mega Evolution occurs, because when the Ultimate Weapon was initially fired by AZ, the fallout from it, if you will, actually kind of gave off an energy which allowed certain Pokemon to evolve past their final form into what we now know as Mega Evolved forms. And the Mega Stones that are required to Mega Evolve these Pokemon were also created during this event as well, because the fallout from the Ultimate Weapon, just as it affected the Pokemon who can Mega Evolve, also affected Evolution Stones and essentially upgraded them into Mega Stones capable of evolving Pokemon into Mega Pokemon. So with all of that being said, I think it's rather convenient that Carbink, the Pokemon who mutated into Diancie, is actually a Pokemon who it itself is based on gemstones. And if the fallout from Mega Evolution could have the impact on regular evolution stones that it did, causing them to upgrade into Mega Stones, I think the same could also happen to a Pokemon like Carbink as well, where it itself essentially upgraded and mutated into Diancie as a result of this fallout. And this can also perfectly explain why Diancie is the only Kalos Pokemon who is capable at this point in time of Mega Evolving, because it itself was created out of the energy that created Mega Evolution itself. So that energy is already kind of embedded within it in the first place, which allows it to realize its full potential and become capable of Mega Evolving. And last but not least, we're actually going to be covering another pair of very iconic fairy-type Pokemon, and that would be Jigglypuff and Clefairy. Now this theory comes straight from the man himself, Birdkeeper Toby, and it actually suggests that not only are Jigglypuff and Clefairy very closely related from a evolution and a family type standpoint, but also just like Clefairy, Jigglypuff is actually from the moon. Now, when it comes to how these Pokemon could be directly related to one another, it's pretty easy to see how this could be the case. Not only do they share a type in the fairy typing, but they also look pretty similar as well in that they have the same coloration, they also have the same shiny coloration, they can be found in many of the same locations, and they also evolve with the use of a Moonstone. So that pretty much sums it up in terms of how they are related, and this can actually help us to also determine that Jigglypuff, much like Clefairy, is also from the moon. If you take a look at Jigglypuff for what it's worth, it's actually very easy to see how this Pokemon could potentially be from the moon. First off, it's known as the balloon Pokemon and is capable of filling itself up with air in order to essentially jump and float very high and long distances, much like an astronaut would do in a low gravity situation like the moon. So pretty much that's why Jigglypuff's anatomy is the way it is, because it's built for life on the moon in that low gravity environment. However, you might be asking, while Jigglypuff seems like it could be from the moon, that's only a theory. We pretty much know for a fact that Clefairy is from the moon, yet it doesn't have the same type of lightweight anatomy that Clefairy does, so what is the deal there? Well, that's where this theory actually gets even crazier, because this theory suggests that Clefairy actually made its way from the moon to the Earth much sooner than Jigglypuff did, and its differences to Jigglypuff are actually a result of it adapting to life on Earth. Evidence of this can be seen in Clefairy's trademark wings. When Clefairy would have made its way from the moon to the Earth, obviously the more intense gravity would have prevented it from just jumping around like it probably was used to on the moon with there being such low gravity. So in order to adapt to its environment like we know Pokemon are capable of doing, it actually started to grow wings in order to help it jump and fly around, similar to how it did in its native environment on the moon. And then we have Jigglypuff, who, being a newer resident from the moon, hasn't had time to adapt or evolve yet, and as such is still stuck with its body that was optimized for life on the low gravity environment of the moon. And there we have it, everybody. Those were 5 amazing fairy-type Pokemon theories. Now, as I said at the beginning of the video, I love Pokemon theories of any type, but when it comes to the fairy type, it definitely has an interesting aura about it that is really fun to cover, and I'm glad I got the chance to in this video. If you guys enjoyed the video though, be sure to give it a like and let me know your thoughts on these theories in the comments below. And if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe for way more Pokemon content every single week. week. Be sure to check me out on Spotify as well and give some of my Pokemon remixes a listen if you would like. It greatly supports the channel. And finally, if you're looking for more fairy-type Pokemon related content, I would recommend checking out Loxton's video where he is going over the origins of not only the fairy-type Pokemon Xerneas, but the other two members of its trio in Yveltal and Zygarde. So be sure to click the link in the iCard that'll pop up in about 2 seconds to go check that out. With all that being said though, I love you guys and I will be back Thursday for another one, so until then, as always, I'll smell you guys later.